The Education Minister is putting her final proposals to the Executive on post-primary transfer. For some insight into her thinking, I'm joined by Sinn Féin's Education spokesperson, John O'Dowd, and the Chair of the Education Committee, the DUP's Mervyn. Storey is here too. Thank you both for joining us. John O'Dowd, these proposals, what Mark has outlined, what he thinks they contain, is that the shape of it, really? It's what we know Sinn Féin has wanted, just kind of clarified.
Well, I miss Mark's contribution, but what it's about is decision time. After 2 years of lengthy consultation, prolonged debate, and at times somewhat hostile argument, it's now time for a decision. And what the Minister has done is she's made a bid for legislation based on her proposals of May 07. She submitted a memorandum to her executive colleagues. And what she's seeking is a reasoned, responsible debate at the next executive meeting for executive colleagues to share their views with her in a reasoned way, not the way we had in May 07, which turned into, or May 08, which turned into a row. And what we hope to do is then move on from that point. And that's what we're about to, in this week.
Mervyn, sorry, from what you've seen of these proposals, first of all, should the Executive consider them? Because one of the things Caitríona Ruane has said to date is that she hasn't been allowed to have her proposals get a proper hearing at the Executive table. So just on that principle, should they be discussed?
Well, I think it's regrettable that Caitríona Ruane's almost running like the BBC at the moment, that she is in for repeats. Because here we have a situation where we have a minister who brought about papers in May, and now with the same proposal been brought now in January, 18 months after the Education Minister took up her position, realised the legislative and legal position, realised the agreements that have been entered into at St Andrews, and we have now a situation where that has all been ignored. Now, this Minister told us she had consensus. She has no consensus. Look at the reports today in the Irish News, where we have more grammar schools, more maintained grammar schools, stacking up to go down a route of defiance of the Minister. The Minister told us, of course, that you couldn't set a test on the revised curriculum. She then had to backtrack on that and say, oh, well, now we can set a test. So I think that there's been frustration through all of that process. We have consistently said there should be an agreement. We have been unable to get an agreement with Sinn Féin on this issue because there is a Minister who is tied ideologically to a position. And I think that that has been to the detriment of all our children and all our families. And I agree, it has to go to the Executive, but she knows the answer before it goes to the Executive. There will be no change after Thursday's meeting.
Well, is that not the point here, John O'Dowd? Sinn Féin are a party that knows how to negotiate. This isn't a negotiation. You're putting these proposals down knowing that they'll be rejected. This is actually about the blame game.
No, we're not naive about the political process, and we're certainly not naive about negotiations. And it wasn't Sinn Féin who brought an education into the political negotiations around St Andrews. It was the DUP who done that. There was a constitutional negotiation. They bring education in. That there was no requirement for that. What we're about this week is bringing a paper to the Executive in a bid to seek a legislative process to bring regulation to the education system. The Minister is legally bound and morally bound to do that. Though the Minister has indicated in the Chamber last week, if she doesn't reach agreement, she is going to move on. So I would see us at the end game of this process. We are about decision making. The Minister has went through a lot of personal abuse on this matter. She has went through political attacks on the matter, which the political attacks are fair enough. That's all what politics is about. But at the heart of all this, it's an education matter. It's an educational issue. And what the Minister is saying is that the consultation is now closed. It's moving to the Executive. And it's up to the Executive at the end of the day to decide on what happens next in terms of are they going to act responsibly around this issue. I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of the Executive meeting.
Well, if as looks likely, the Executive does not approve these regulations because they're based on the Minister's proposals as opposed to any kind of inter-party deal, she would presumably bring forward guidance. But Mervyn, Storey, what authority would that have then if she does that without the Executive say-so on individual schools? Would they have to do what she says? There's
been a lot of scaremongering, and again, by the Minister, because remember, this Minister repeatedly tells us she is the Minister for Education. So remember, in June, she issued letters, threatening letters to both primary schools and also to post-primary schools, to grammar schools, about using independent tests and coaching and assisting in independent tests. The regulations would have absolutely no legal standing. schools are given a position where they are expected to have due regard. And we have tabled over the last number of months numerous questions. In fact, a priority written question will be answered probably tomorrow again by the Minister on the announcement in my constituency in regards to the decision between schools in Magherafelt and schools in Ballymena to set their own independent tests, about the validity, the legality of that, and also about the power of or non-regulation for her to impose a different set of rules. Those regulations, and she has tried, the Minister has tried, and she has, unfortunately, she has succeeded in some regards in raising tensions and concerns. But while it's not the preferred option for us to have an unregulated system, if we believe for academic and for educational reasons it's good to have that variety and that provision in our educational system, then that's the way that we're going to have to go.
John O'Dowd, do you concur that the guidelines will not be enforceable?
The guidelines are enforceable. They have legal competence. But there is an option within those guidance for schools if they wish to continue down the academic route. Now, we won't be including that, I would imagine, in our guidance, but schools will have that option. I think that's wrong for schools to do that. I think in some instances, and I think of the Fermanagh area, where secondary schools are closing because a small number of grammar schools have decided that they will continue down this path, has affected the entire education system in Fermanagh. I think it's a selfish act at times. I would ask that schools take a look at the guidance, they take a look at the way forward in terms of education, they take a look at the rest of what Western Europe's doing in terms of their education system, and move forward into a 21st education system which provides for our education, for our young people and for our economy.
Presumably at some level, the guidance from the Minister and whatever the schools do themselves is going to have to mesh together, because you might get two children who pass a test and then they've got to sort them out some way. I was saying earlier on that I noticed in this paper a random selection thing that the Minister is suggesting based on randomly generated alphabet numbers. I mean, is this going to come in? Are the schools going to have to resort to this in those instances where the test doesn't sort things out for them?
No, but I think at the department, you see, I think that there's an assumption that somehow in an unregulated system that the Department of Education becomes totally and absolutely of non-effect. I could see in an unregulated system that where there were disputes, that the department would be quite capable and competent of trying to resolve those issues. Now, we either have a Department of Education that has an oversight of the school estate in Northern Ireland, or we don't. And unfortunately, we now have a situation where, despite there being no consensus, despite there being the Catholic Church, large sections of the community, the poll, and John says about the fact that this was introduced by us at St Andrews. Remember, it was the now Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, by his act in 2001, that brought about this crisis, when in an unaccountable executive, a minister was able to do the damage that he did. And from 2001 till 2009, we still have a situation where there has been an impasse. There is issues that needs to be addressed. And the most important issue that needs to be addressed at this minute in time is, what are we going to do with our P6? Those parents and those schools want clarity. These proposals won't bring clarity. They will only point to the inevitable, which is an unregulated system.
Well, in terms of the unregulated system, I think that the unregulated system will work. There will be scaremongering, but the system will fall apart if we don't receive agreement at the executive meeting on Thursday. However, there will still be a role for the Department of Education. The Department of Education will be taking the lead role in terms of education. The scenario which Mark refers to in terms of a random selection of alphabetical names to ensure a child enters schools can happen now. That only happens when a school is oversubscribed and there's no other way of defining which child should enter that school. That happens under the current system, happens in England, Wales and Scotland and the Republic of Ireland. That's the way the system works, unfortunately, when you reach that level. But guidance, if we reach the stage where guidance is issued, it will set out clearly how schools can operate within that guidance. And I would think that schools would be wise to operate within that guidance, because those schools going down the road of independent tests are walking into a legal minefield for the boards of governors, the trustees and everybody else involved in that school.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both very much indeed.